The heavy iron gates of the Seoul National Cemetery didn't creak. They groaned under the weight of 1,000 sins as Park Doh-yun, the man who owned the city's shadows, pressed his forehead into the freezing mud. His custom-tailored silk suit, worth more than the orphan's dilapidated shack, soaked up the filthy rainwater. Behind him, 300 men in identical black suits stood in a razor-straight line, their heads bowed so low their chins touched their ties. In front of the kneeling giant stood a woman whose shoes were held together by duct tape, her hand trembling as she clutched a faded photograph of a boy who would never come home. Doh-yun, a man who had never lowered his gaze to a prime minister, was trembling. He was the only light left in this city, the mother whispered, her voice a serrated blade in the wind. And you extinguished it for a ledger. 1 hour ago, Doh-yun was a god sitting in a glass tower. Now he was a beggar in the rain, realizing that the empire he built was a tomb. To understand why the most feared man in South Korea was begging a penniless widow for a forgiveness that would never come, you have to see the moment the tiger realized he was wearing a collar. 6 months ago, the streets of Gangnam belonged to the pulse of neon and the hum of black engines. Doh-yun sat in the back of a pristine Genesis, his fingers tracing a jagged scar on his knuckle. He didn't look at the beggars, he looked at the spreadsheets. His goal was simple: total territorial acquisition before the winter frost. He needed the slum district cleared for the new casino hub. He gave the order with a flick of a gold lighter. Clear the block. No delays. He didn't mention the lives in the way. He didn't have to. His enforcers knew that silence meant removal. The first complication arrived in the form of a 10-year-old boy named Minho. Minho didn't have a father, but he had a mother who worked 3 jobs and a heart that didn't know how to beat in retreat. While the bulldozers idling at the edge of the district hummed like hungry beasts, Minho sat on the curb, drawing a dragon in the dirt with a stick. He didn't move when the black sedans pulled up. He didn't move when the men with the steel pipes stepped onto the asphalt. He only looked up when a shadow fell over his drawing. Doh-yun stepped out of the car, the scent of expensive tobacco clashing with the smell of rotting cabbage from the nearby market. He looked at the boy. Minho didn't blink. "You're blocking the path," Doh-yun said, his voice a low vibration. Minho pointed to the dragon. "My mom says dragons guard the gates. I'm guarding her." Doh-yun felt a phantom pain in his own chest, a memory of a boy 30 years ago who stood in the same mud. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of bills thick enough to buy a new life. "Take this and move." Minho didn't reach for the money. He spit on the dirt dragon. "My mom says blood money doesn't wash off." Doh-yun's hand tightened on his lighter. He walked back to the car, the door closing with a heavy thud. "Get them out," he told his lieutenant, a man named Kong with eyes like cold glass. Kong didn't ask for clarification. As the car rolled away, Doh-yun watched the boy in the rearview mirror until he was just a speck in the gray landscape. He told himself it was progress. He told himself the boy would find a better home. He didn't know that Kang's definition of removal didn't involve relocation. That night, the sky over the slums turned a sickly orange. The fire department didn't arrive until the roofs had already collapsed. Doh-yun stood in his penthouse, watching the smoke rise like an accusatory finger. His phone buzzed. A single text from Kong: "The site is cleared." Doh-yun poured a glass of whiskey that cost more than a year of a teacher's salary, but the liquid tasted like ash. He stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass. He saw a king, but for the first time the crown felt like a target. The following morning the news didn't report on a riot. They reported on a tragedy. An orphan boy, found clutched in the arms of a burnt-out dragon mural. Minho hadn't run. He had stayed to guard the gate. Doh-yun's glass shattered on the floor. He didn't call Kong. He didn't call his lawyers. He grabbed his coat and drove himself to the district, his tires screaming against the pavement. He pushed through the police tape, his expensive shoes melting on the hot asphalt. He saw her then. Minho's mother. She wasn't screaming. She was sitting in the middle of the ruins, sifting through the gray flakes of what used to be her life. If you believe that the soul of a child is worth more than the height of a skyscraper, hit the like button so this story reaches the ones who think they are untouchable. Doh-yun approached the woman. Her name was Sun-young. She didn't look up when his shadow fell over her. She was holding a charred stick, the same one Minho had used to draw the dragon. "I offered him a way out," Doh-yun whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. Sun-young finally looked at him. Her eyes weren't filled with tears, they were filled with a vacuum that threatened to swallow him whole. "He didn't want a way out," she said, her voice a ghost of a rasp. "He wanted a home. You gave him a grave." The weight of the city seemed to collapse onto Doh-yun's shoulders. He realized then that Kang hadn't acted alone. Kang had acted on the momentum of Doh-yun's own coldness. He turned to see Kang standing by the car, a smug smile playing on his lips. Kang walked over, stepping on a child's shoe without noticing. "Boss, the developers are already calling. We can break ground on Monday." Doh-yun didn't speak. He swung his fist with the weight of 30 years of buried guilt. Kang's head snapped back, his body hitting the scorched earth. "There will be no casino," Doh-yun said, his voice vibrating with a lethal frequency. "We are building a memorial." Kang scrambled up, wiping blood from his lip. "The board won't allow that. You're a businessman, Park. Not a saint." Kang pulled a knife, the blade reflecting the gray morning light. The men in black suits shifted, their loyalty caught in a tectonic pull between the man who fed them and the man who led them. Doh-yun didn't reach for a weapon. He stepped toward the blade. "Then let the board come for me." He disarmed Kang in 3 blurred movements, the knife clattering into the ash. He didn't kill him. He handed the knife to Sun-young. "He did this. Do what you must." Sun-young looked at the knife, then at the man who had ordered the destruction. She dropped the blade into the mud. "Killing him won't bring Minho back. It will only make me like you." She walked away, her duct-taped shoes leaving footprints in the soot. Doh-yun watched her go, a king who had just realized he was a prisoner of his own making. He turned to his men. "Find every family we displaced. Double the compensation. If a single one is missing, I'll take it out of your marrow." The next 3 months were a slow-motion execution of Doh-yun's empire. He liquidated the offshore accounts. He canceled the contracts. He became a ghost in his own company, ignored by the board and hunted by the creditors. He moved from his penthouse to a small apartment overlooking the ruins of the slum. He spent his days in the mud, working alongside the laborers to build the memorial, a massive stone dragon that spanned the entire block. His hands, once soft and manicured, became a map of blisters and scars. One evening, a black sedan pulled up to the construction site. The board had sent a message. 4 men stepped out, their jackets bulging with the shape of suppressed pistols. Doh-yun didn't stop laying the bricks. He didn't even look up. "The dragon needs its scales," he muttered. The first bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground, the cold mud embracing him like an old friend. He saw the men approaching, their silhouettes blocked by the rising stone neck of the dragon. Just as the lead gunman raised his weapon for the final shot, a brick hit him in the side of the head. Then a stone. Then a bottle. The people of the district, the ones Doh-yun had tried to erase, were standing on the ruins. They didn't have guns. They had the debris of their lives. They swarmed the gunman with a silent, relentless fury. Doh-yun watched through a haze of pain as his enemies were swallowed by the very people he had stepped on. If you think the strength of the many is the only true check on the greed of the few, drop a like so the algorithm knows the story matters. Sun-young appeared through the crowd. She didn't offer him a hand. She watched him bleed into the dirt he had stolen. "Why?" she asked. Doh-yun coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Because I remembered the dragon I drew when I was 10. I forgot it was supposed to guard the gate, not burn it." Sun-young stood there for a long time. Finally she knelt. She didn't touch him, but she placed Minho's stick next to his hand. "What? So you can see what you've done." Doh-yun didn't go to the hospital. He stayed in the district, his wounds stitched by a local vet. The board's assassins didn't come back. The story of the reformed Reaper had become a viral wildfire, and even the shadows feared the light of public scrutiny. On the day the cemetery memorial was finally finished, Doh-yun stood before the iron gates. He wasn't the Mafia boss anymore. He was a man with a suit that didn't fit and a soul that was finally starting to itch. He saw Sun-young standing by a fresh headstone. She looked older, her hair turning the color of the rain clouds. Doh-yun felt the gravity of the moment pull him down. He didn't care about the cameras that were secretly filming from the bushes. He didn't care about his remaining lieutenants watching from the cars. He hit the mud. He bowed until his forehead touched the earth. He stayed there for 10 minutes, the rain soaking through his clothes. He waited for the scream, the curse, the strike. It never came. He felt a hand, small, rough, and smelling of laundry soap, place itself on the back of his neck. "The dragon is guarded now," Sun-young whispered. "You can stand up, Park Doh-yun." Doh-yun rose, his face a mask of mud and tears. He looked at the 300 men behind him. They were still bowed. They weren't bowing to him, they were bowing to the woman. He realized that power didn't come from the Genesis or the gold lighter. It came from the ability to look a victim in the eye and not blink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold lighter. He dropped it into the mud. "What now?" one of his men asked, his voice trembling. Doh-yun looked at the stone dragon rising over the city in the distance. Now we protect the gates. He walked out of the cemetery, his gait heavy but certain. He didn't look back at the black sedans. He started walking toward the slums, the rain washing the mud from his face but leaving the stains on his soul. If you believe that true leadership is found in the dirt, not the penthouse, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. Years later, the district was no longer a slum. It was a forest of green and stone, a sanctuary in a city of glass. In the center stood a dragon, its eyes made of the gold from a melted-down lighter. An old man sat at its base every day drawing in the dirt with a stick. He didn't have a suit. He didn't have a car. But every child who passed by called him Grandfather Guard. One day, a young man in a sharp suit stopped by the dragon. He looked at the old man with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "You used to own this city, didn't you?" the young man asked, his fingers twitching toward his own gold watch. The old man didn't look up from his drawing. He traced the curve of a wing in the dust. "I never owned it," the old man said, his voice a peaceful vibration. "I just realized I was the one who was lost." The young man scoffed and walked away, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. The old man watched him go, seeing the shadow of the tiger he used to be. He looked at the dragon, then at the sky. The rain began to fall, soft and cleansing. He closed his eyes, the memory of a boy and a mother finally at rest. The gate was guarded. The debt was paid. The dragon was home. Gemini said. The legend of the Grandfather Guard was more than a local myth. It was a living warning to the new titans of Seoul. But while Park Do-yun found peace in the dirt, the vacuum he left behind in the criminal underworld began to fester. The board of directors he once led hadn't forgotten the $300 million he had redirected into the slums foundation. They didn't want the land anymore, they wanted the blood of the man who made them look like fools. One Tuesday, the rhythm of the district was broken. A fleet of silver Mercedes-Benzes, sharp as shark fins, glided to a halt near the stone dragon. Out stepped a man Maya's age, wearing a suit of blinding white. This was Choi Sang-hoon, the man who had replaced Do-yun. He didn't carry a weapon, he carried a legal document. "The memorial is beautiful, Do-yun," Sang-hoon said, his voice a polished, synthetic silk. "But the city has rezoned this park as surplus. You built a dragon, but I bought the air it breathes." He tapped the document against the stone dragon's snout. "Demolition begins at midnight. Unless, of course, you still have the ledger of the offshore accounts you hid." Do-yun didn't stand up. He didn't even stop his drawing. "The ledger is buried where you'll never find it, Sang-hoon. Because it's not in a bank. It's in the memory of every mother in this district." He finally looked up, his eyes two chips of flint. "You think you've bought the air? You haven't even smelled the storm coming." By 11 p.m., the district was eerily silent. The streetlights had been cut, leaving the stone dragon to be illuminated only by the pale, cold moonlight. The demolition crews arrived with heavy wrecking balls and armored bulldozers. Sang-hoon sat in the back of his car, sipping cognac, waiting for the first crack of stone. If you believe that a monument built on love is stronger than an empire built on greed, hit the like button so the dragon's fire reaches the dark corners of the city. The lead bulldozer roared to life, its steel blade lowering toward the dragon's base. But as it moved forward, a single figure stepped into the light of its high beams. It wasn't Do-yun. It was Sun Young. Behind her, one by one, the lights in the surrounding apartments flickered on. Thousands of people, the cleaners, the cooks, the drivers, the very heartbeat of Seoul, stepped out into the street. They didn't carry signs. They carried candles. They formed a human wall around the dragon, 5 layers deep. The bulldozer driver hesitated, the engine coughing in the stillness. Sang-hoon stepped out of his car, his white suit glowing like a ghost. "Move them," he screamed at his security detail. "They are trespassing on private property." Do-yun finally stood. He walked to the front of the crowd and stood next to Sun Young. He wasn't the mafia boss and he wasn't the beggar. He was the shield. "The law says this is your land, Sang-hoon," Do-yun shouted, his voice echoing off the buildings. "But the people say this is our soul. Are you going to kill 10,000 witnesses for a casino?" The standoff lasted until 3 a.m. The world was watching now. Thousands of cell phone live streams were broadcasting the Battle of the Dragon to every corner of the globe. The political pressure began to mount. Sang-hoon's phone rang. It was the Minister of Land. The order was simple: retreat or the government will seize your assets for inciting a riot. Sang-hoon looked at the sea of candles, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. He realized he hadn't just lost the land, he had lost the city's fear. He signaled the retreat, the silver cars slinking away like beaten dogs. The district erupted in a cheer that could be heard in the blue house. But Doh-yun knew the snake wasn't dead. He pulled Sun Young aside as the crowd began to celebrate. "He'll come for me tonight, Sun Young. Personally. He can't let the grandfather live after this." "Then we fight," she said. Doh-yun shook his head. "No. We end it." He walked to the center of the park, alone, and sat on a bench. 20 minutes later, the headlights of a single car approached. Sang-hoon stepped out, a suppressed pistol in his hand. No suits. No documents. Just the raw, shivering ego of a man who had lost his crown. "You ruined everything, Doh-yun," he hissed. "You made us look like we have hearts." Doh-yun smiled. "We do, Sang-hoon. You just forgot where yours was hidden." A single shot rang out. Doh-yun felt the heat in his chest, the world tilting as he slumped against the base of the dragon. Sang-hoon stood over him, aiming for the head. "The dragon dies with you." "The dragon is already everywhere," Doh-yun whispered. Suddenly, the stone of the dragon's neck seemed to shift. Two of Doh-yun's old lieutenants, men who had been hiding in the hollow interior of the monument, stepped out. They didn't fire. They simply held up their phones. "Recorded." "What?" "To the police, the board, and your mother, Sang-hoon," one of them said. Sang-hoon's gun dropped. He looked at the dying man against the stone. Doh-yun wasn't afraid. He looked peaceful. He looked at the drawing he had made in the dirt one last time, a dragon guarding a small stick-figure boy. If you believe that the greatest victory is not in surviving, but in making sure your truth outlives you, leave a like so Doh-yun's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Doh-yun's funeral was the largest in the history of Seoul. He wasn't buried in the national cemetery. He was buried at the base of the dragon, in the dirt he had once stolen and later redeemed. Sun Young stood by the grave, holding the gold lighter he had dropped years ago. She didn't cry. She knew that the man who had knelt in the mud was finally standing tall. The district became a sovereign zone of sorts, a place where the rules of the greedy didn't apply. And they say that on quiet, rainy nights, if you look closely at the stone dragon, its eyes still glow with a faint, golden light. Choi Sang-hoon was found a week later, his white suit stained with the ink of his own confession, sitting in a prison cell that smelled of damp concrete and regret. The board of directors was dismantled by the very feds Doh-yun had tipped off before his death. The story of the Mafia boss who bowed was finished. But the story of the dragon of the slums was just beginning.